January 1945. A bitter wind swept across the frozen plains of northern Europe, carrying with it the distant rumble of armored engines and the sharp scent of gunpowder. Snow lay thick, a blanket broken only by the deep tracks of tanks and trudging soldiers, their breath fogging the air like ghosts of the living. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a column of German Panther tanks rolled forward, steel monsters glinting under the weak winter sun. In a small, camouflaged foxhole perched atop a ridge, a lone Allied sniper adjusted his scope, fingers numb from the cold. The target lay 2.5 miles away, an impossible shot, experts had said. The rifle in his hands was not just a weapon, but a precise instrument of calculation, physics, and human nerve. Each breath, each heartbeat was a countdown. The slightest misjudgment would turn this calculated risk into certain death. He studied the landscape, ridges, wind currents, the faint shimmer of heat off the tank's turret. Somewhere inside that steel hull, crewmen moved, unaware of the eyes tracking their every motion. Outside, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting. This was a moment suspended between fear and possibility, where one shot could tilt the balance of life and death across a frozen battlefield. And in that cold stillness, the sniper prepared to attempt the impossible. By the winter of 1944-45, the European theater of World War II had become a brutal chessboard of armored warfare, entrenched positions, and relentless attrition. The Allies were pressing from the west after the liberation of France, while the Soviet forces advanced from the east, pushing German lines into a defensive collapse. Tanks, once instruments of shock and mobility, had become the backbone of defensive strategies, able to dominate frozen plains and fortified positions alike. Among these, the German Panther tank had earned a fearsome reputation. Its sloped armor, powerful 75 gun, and high mobility made it a formidable adversary, especially against infantry and conventional anti-tank measures. To halt a column of Panthers was to confront an armored wall that seemed almost invincible. The terrain amplified the challenge. In northern Europe, the winter months brought relentless snow, ice, and fog. Roads became treacherous, supply lines stretched thin, and visibility was frequently reduced to mere meters in whiteout conditions. For snipers and long-range gunners, the environment demanded mastery over not just the rifle, but the subtle forces of wind, temperature, and atmospheric pressure. At distances exceeding 2 miles, even the smallest miscalculation in trajectory or environmental effect could render a shot futile. A single gust could shift a bullet's path by feet, transforming precision into disaster. Within this landscape, Allied forces had begun experimenting with specialized sniper operations. These were no ordinary infantry engagements. They relied on painstaking observation, complex calculations, and patience measured in hours or even days. Maps were studied, trajectories calculated, and repeated reconnaissance ensured that the slightest movement of enemy armor or terrain features was accounted for. The task was more than marksmanship. It was applied physics in a battlefield laboratory. Every shot required the sniper to consider the Coriolis effect, wind shear, and the minute drop of a projectile over unprecedented distances. Yet it was not just the environment or physics that made this shot extraordinary. Morale, human skill, and nerve played equal roles. Soldiers on both sides knew that long-range sniping could alter entire engagements, delaying armored advances, or instilling fear in tank crews. Psychological pressure mounted with each passing hour. The sniper's mind became as crucial as his weapon, balancing fear, anticipation, and meticulous calculation. Amid this backdrop, a single man's focus on a distant tank represented a convergence of technology, training, and sheer human courage. Every factor, from the cold bite of winter to the lethal efficiency of German engineering, made the task seem impossible. Yet history would soon record that the impossible was not beyond the grasp of skill and determination. The weapons of war in 1945 had reached a level of specialization that transformed how battles were fought. Snipers were no longer merely sharpshooters. They had become precision operatives whose skill could influence entire campaigns. The rifle in question, often a modified long-range variant like the British Lee Enfield No. 4 MKIT or similar Allied sniper rifles, was engineered to maximize range, accuracy, and stability. Each round fired was a blend of metallurgy, propellant science, and precise engineering. The scope, a marvel of optics for its time, allowed the shooter to observe targets at distances previously considered unattainable. But the weapon alone could not overcome the challenges posed by nature. Ballistics played a critical role. Over 2.5 miles, a bullet's flight was subject to the cumulative effects of gravity, wind, temperature fluctuations, and the Earth's rotation. Calculating these factors required not only knowledge, but an intimate understanding of the terrain and environmental conditions. Advanced tables and charts guided snipers in estimating bullet drop and windage, yet these were still approximations. On a battlefield, the difference between theory and reality could be fatal. To make the shot, the sniper had to anticipate variables invisible to the naked eye, drifting smoke from distant artillery, shifting snow on the ground, even subtle changes in light that hinted at enemy movement. Tactics intertwined with technology. Allied snipers often positioned themselves atop ridges or concealed depressions, observing from distances far beyond typical engagement ranges. Movement was minimized. Any sound, shadow, or disturbance could betray a position to enemy reconnaissance. Patience became weaponized. Hours spent waiting for the ideal moment were as critical as the shot itself. Commanders understood the strategic value of such long-range interventions. A single hit on a high-value target, such as a German Panther or Tiger tank, could delay an armored advance, disrupt supply lines, and shift battlefield momentum. Human factors remained paramount. The shooter's concentration had to remain unbroken despite bitter cold, fatigue, and the omnipresent threat of discovery. Psychological endurance became as vital as marksmanship. Every heartbeat, every breath was measured and controlled. The sniper's mind needed to harmonize with his calculations, his senses tuned to the battlefield's subtlest cues. Even minor distractions, a distant explosion, the crunch of snow under an enemy boot, could compromise the shot. This convergence of technology, tactics, and human precision created a unique theater where impossible feats were conceivable. The sniper's mission was more than a test of skill. It was a demonstration of applied science under the pressure of life and death. Every factor, the rifle, the optics, the wind, the slope of the terrain, the movements of the enemy tank, would converge into a single, fleeting moment. It was in this crucible that human ingenuity would meet the mechanical perfection of the enemy's armored machines. And as the sniper prepared, everything he had learned, every calculation, and every moment of patience would soon be tested in a shot that would defy the expectations of all who witnessed it. Human angle. In the frozen expanse of northern Europe, the sniper was more than a soldier. He was an observer, a mathematician, and a master of patience. His training had prepared him for this, yet nothing could replicate the tension of a moment when every variable counted. Years of discipline had honed his body to ignore the bite of winter and his mind to measure the subtle shifts in the environment. He had learned to breathe in sync with the terrain, to let instinct complement calculation, and to treat fear as a tool rather than a weakness. Behind the scope, he was both hidden and hyper-aware, fully alive to every distant sound, the whine of a tank engine, the faint crunch of snow under an enemy boot, the whisper of wind across ridges. Every second stretched into eternity, each heartbeat a countdown to either triumph or disaster. Tactical angle. The positioning of the sniper was not accidental. On the battlefield, terrain dictated life and death, and commanding officers understood that height, cover, and observation lines could turn a lone marksman into a force multiplier. Perched atop a ridge overlooking an armored column, the sniper had a panoramic view of enemy movement. From this vantage point, he could track the approach of Panther tanks, anticipate turns, and calculate the exact point where a projectile would meet its target. Camouflage was essential. Any misplaced snow, shadow, or reflection could reveal his location. The tactics involved meticulous timing. The shot had to be synchronized with enemy movement, environmental shifts, and even artillery activity that might obscure or disrupt aim. It was a delicate balance between patience and precision, strategy and execution. Technological angle. The rifle itself was an extension of the sniper's mind. A modified long-range rifle, capable of extreme accuracy, paired with a high-powered scope, became an instrument of calculated lethality. The ammunition was carefully chosen for consistency, with each round tested to ensure predictable trajectory. Yet even with the finest weapon, the shot was not guaranteed. Over 2.6 miles, a bullet could be deflected by wind gusts, temperature differentials, or slight imperfections in the barrel. Calculations had to account for bullet drop, Coriolis effect, and air density. Charts, tables, and prior reconnaissance informed the process, but the ultimate success depended on the human operator harmonizing with the weapon's capabilities. Technology provided possibility, skill made it reality. This triad, human endurance, tactical ingenuity, and technological precision, formed the foundation for what would become a moment remembered for its audacity. Each angle alone was significant, but combined, they created the conditions under which the impossible could be attempted. Enemy angled. From inside the Panther tank, the German crew experienced the battlefield through armored lenses and engine vibrations. They relied on coordination, training, and the assumed invulnerability of their steel hulls. To them, snipers were a distant nuisance, unlikely to pose a lethal threat at extreme ranges. The crew's focus was on movement, supply lines, and anticipating infantry attacks, never considering that a single bullet could penetrate their carefully constructed defenses from over 2 miles away. Yet unbeknownst to them, every maneuver, every exposed turret, every slight pause became data for a patient observer. The battlefield was not just a contest of brute force, it was a silent duel between human ingenuity and mechanical power. Leadership angle. Commanders on both sides understood the stakes. For the Allies, a successful long-range engagement could delay or disrupt a German armored advance, buying precious time for infantry and artillery positioning. For German officers, maintaining momentum and shielding tanks from unseen threats was crucial. Orders emphasized coordination and speed, but the unpredictable presence of a skilled sniper introduced an uncontrollable variable. Decisions had to account for both the obvious and the invisible, the threat of enemy marksmen capable of altering entire operations. Leadership, in this context, became a matter of risk management, balancing offensive action with defensive caution in a landscape where a single error could be catastrophic. Moral angles. The impossible shot also carried an ethical dimension. Taking a life from miles away, unseen and almost untouchable, posed profound questions about the nature of warfare and human responsibility. For the sniper, it was a task dictated by necessity, strategy, and survival, but it was also a moral act, compressing the enormity of combat into a single calculated decision. For the enemy, surviving meant the difference between life and death, often without awareness of the forces acting upon them. The moral weight of the engagement was mirrored in the psychological aftermath. The pride of skill, the tension of anticipation, and the recognition that precision killing, even in service of a just cause, leaves a lasting imprint on the human conscience. These perspectives, enemy, leadership, and moral, add layers to the story, transforming a single shot into a narrative of strategy, human courage, and ethical complexity. They set the stage for the decisive moment when all variables converge. The climax, where the sniper's preparation meets reality and history is made. January 24, 1945. The morning fog hung low over the snow-blanketed plains, muting sound and blurring the horizon. From his concealed position atop a ridge, the sniper observed the German armored column inching forward. Panther tanks, steel behemoths with glinting turrets, rumbled across the frozen earth, oblivious to the eyes trained on them. Every detail mattered: the way a turret turned, the angle of the sunlight on armor, the faint heat shimmer rising from engines. The sniper's calculations had been exhaustive. Wind measurements were taken from flags, smoke, and drifting snow. Distance was gauged with meticulous triangulation against ridges and distant trees. Temperature and air density were factored into the bullet's flight path. The rifle rested on a custom-made mount, reducing tremor to near zero, while the scope magnified every subtle movement across the 2.5-mile stretch. Hours had passed in near-perfect stillness, each one increasing the tension, compressing the sniper's focus into a single point in space and time. As the lead tank paused to adjust formation, the sniper's heartbeat synced with the wind's rhythm. A miscalculation would mean failure or death. He adjusted the scope minutely, accounting for Coriolis's effect, slope, and the spin drift of the bullet. The cold bit at his fingers, yet the precision of muscle memory overrode the discomfort. Outside, the battlefield seemed frozen in anticipation. Snowflakes drifted past like silent witnesses, while the distant rumble of engines punctuated the oppressive silence. This was a moment suspended between possibility and impossibility, where every element, human, mechanical, environmental, had aligned for just one opportunity. The sniper's finger hovered over the trigger, a final assessment of trajectory, wind, and movement. Then came the decision to release the shot that, if successful, would redefine the limits of marksmanship in the theater of war. In the frozen stillness of that ridge, with everything calculated and aligned, the sniper exhaled slowly, merging patience with precision, preparing to challenge what had been deemed impossible. The rifle cracked, a sound almost swallowed by the distance and the whisper of the winter wind. The bullet traced a path across the frozen plain, invisible to all but the sniper's trained eye and the unforgiving laws of physics. Every millisecond mattered as it traversed the 2.6 miles toward its target. Gravity tugged relentlessly, wind nudged subtly, yet the sniper's calculations held true. Time seemed suspended, the battlefield reduced to a single line, connecting his eye to the Panther tank's turret. Inside the tank, the crew continued their routine, unaware of the silent predator observing their every move. Then, almost imperceptibly, a strike erupted, steel yielding to precision. The bullet penetrated the turret, striking a critical component. Inside, chaos erupted, armored plates shuddered, instruments shattered, and the crew scrambled in confusion. The once imposing machine, thought impervious at this range, was suddenly incapacitated. Smoke hissed from ruptured systems, and the lead tank ground to an abrupt halt, its momentum broken. The surrounding Allied forces, watching from a distance, registered the moment with disbelief. The sniper's peers knew the calculations had been precise, but seeing the result unfold in real time transformed theory into tangible reality. Enemy tanks faltered, infantry hesitated, momentum shifted. In those frozen seconds, the impossible had become fact. Every factor, human skill, environmental mastery, tactical foresight, and technological reliability, converged to create an extraordinary moment. The aftermath was immediate yet subtle. The German column adjusted formation, now wary of unseen threats from improbable ranges. Commanders on both sides reassessed positions, aware that even distant, concealed marksmen could alter the flow of an entire operation. For the sniper, there was no celebration, only the quiet acknowledgement that preparation, patience, and precision had intersected with opportunity. The shot would be recorded in reports, cited in after-action reviews, and remembered by those who witnessed its impact. It was more than a feat of marksmanship. It was a demonstration of how human ingenuity could challenge the perceived limits of warfare. The moment closed, but its consequences rippled outward, setting the stage for the aftermath, the measurable changes in battlefield strategy, morale, and tactical awareness that followed this extraordinary act. The frozen battlefield, once a scene of tense anticipation, now shifted under the weight of sudden disruption. The lead Panther tank, immobilized by a single, impossibly precise shot, forced the German column to halt and reassess. Orders were delayed, formations adjusted, and a sense of caution replaced the previously unyielding momentum of the armored advance. For the Allied forces observing from a distance, disbelief quickly gave way to cautious optimism. A single sniper had neutralized what was considered an untouchable threat, proving that precision and patience could triumph over brute force. Reports filtered up the chain of command. Officers documented the event with a mixture of astonishment and analytical scrutiny. Logs noted the range, environmental conditions, and timing of the shot, recognizing it as an unprecedented demonstration of marksmanship. It became clear that long-range sniping was no longer a supplementary tactic. It could be a decisive tool, capable of reshaping engagements without the need for large-scale artillery or infantry assaults. The German crews, meanwhile, faced the disorienting aftermath inside their armored vehicles. Shock, confusion, and frustration rippled through the ranks. Manuals and doctrine had not prepared them for a sniper capable of striking from such extreme distance. Panic was mitigated by training, but the psychological impact lingered. Every turret movement was now cautious, every exposed hatch a potential vulnerability. Commanders noted that morale could be influenced not just by losses, but by the awareness of unseen, expert opponents operating at extraordinary ranges. Beyond the immediate tactical impact, the shot influenced battlefield procedures. Allied forces began to place greater emphasis on reconnaissance, wind and weather observation, and sniper training for long-range engagement. German commanders, conversely, implemented more conservative movement protocols, increased scouting, and enhanced counter-sniper measures. In the span of a few minutes, one bullet had altered the rhythm of the battlefield, demonstrating the strategic significance of a well-executed, high-skill operation. The sniper himself remained silent, hidden within his camouflage, observing the unfolding responses of both friend and foe. There was no celebration, no fanfare, only the quiet recognition that the impossible had been achieved. The battlefield had been reshaped, and the next phase of operations would be conducted under the shadow of that single, extraordinary shot. In the days following the sniper's extraordinary feat, the reverberations extended far beyond the frozen ridge. Allied forces incorporated the event into training discussions, emphasizing the potential of extreme-range engagements. Manuals were updated to include new calculations for ballistics, wind assessment, and camouflage techniques. Sniper operations evolved from specialized support roles into strategic tools capable of influencing armored maneuvers and infantry movements across wide swathes of the front. One shot, meticulously executed, had demonstrated that precision could complement and sometimes replace sheer firepower. German commanders were forced to reassess armored strategy. The psychological impact was profound. No longer could they assume safety at extreme distances. Increased vigilance, dispersed formations, and enhanced reconnaissance became standard practice. The presence of a hidden expert marksman changed not only how tanks moved, but how soldiers perceived vulnerability. Units became hesitant, measuring every action against the unseen potential for catastrophic loss. In essence, one sniper had injected a variable that doctrine could not fully mitigate. For the shooter, the aftermath was deeply personal as well as tactical. While no medal or immediate recognition followed, the knowledge of achieving the impossible carried its own weight. Months of training, meticulous calculation, and patient observation had culminated in a single act that would influence future operations. He understood, as few do, the intimate connection between preparation and execution, and the quiet power of skill exercised under pressure. Reports and after-action reviews captured the incident, noting its significance not only for immediate battlefield outcomes, but also for future tactical thinking. Other snipers, inspired by the success, sought to master the combination of technology, patience, and environmental calculation. Allied officers began to prioritize extreme-range engagement as a legitimate tactic rather than an experimental one. Even among enemy ranks, stories of the impossible shot circulated, fostering caution and a grudging respect for the unseen threat. In this way, the consequences of the sniper's action extended beyond a single tank, a single day, or even a single battle. The interplay of human skill, technological mastery, and tactical insight became a model for understanding how one individual, armed with knowledge and patience, could shape the broader currents of war. The stage was now set for reflection on what this act meant for history, warfare, and human ingenuity. The frozen ridge where the shot was fired would soon be reclaimed by snow and silence, but the impact of that single bullet endured far beyond the battlefield. It was more than a technical feat. It was a testament to human patience, precision, and the relentless pursuit of mastery under extreme conditions. In a war defined by overwhelming machinery and massed armies, one individual had altered the calculus of combat through intellect, observation, and discipline. This moment illuminates a broader truth about warfare and humanity. Technology and firepower, though formidable, are inseparable from the minds that wield them. The sniper's rifle was merely a tool. The real power lay in the careful blending of knowledge, training, and courage. Across history, battles have been decided not only by numbers, but by the insight and daring of those willing to challenge what others deem impossible. There is also a human element that resonates beyond strategy or tactics. The Sniper's Act reminds us that war is shaped not only by machinery and doctrine, but by individual choice and responsibility. Each calculation, each decision carries weight, and the consequences echo across lives, morale, and history itself. The frozen plains, the halted tanks, the recalculated strategies, all testify to the quiet potency of focus and resolve in the midst of chaos. In the end, the story of the impossible shot is a story of possibility. It is a reminder that even in the most unforgiving circumstances, mastery, courage, and meticulous preparation can overcome what once seemed insurmountable. History remembers the shot not merely as an act of warfare, but as an enduring example of human ingenuity meeting the challenges of technology and nature. A single moment where patience and precision converged to make the impossible possible.